Neqotkuk N'Tetli Mikwi Tahasoltipen. Too big we are remembering.
Nildali was Darrah Pine Beaver, Najayal Nil Neqotkuk. My name is Darrah, also referred to in the community as Pine, and I am from Tobic First Nation, where I grew up and I currently reside. The work that I'm doing, I have a pretty diverse resume, and the work that I do, I get pulled in different directions a lot because of my interest in just First Nation social justice. I've done a lot of policy work and research work, and I would say for the past 15 years, it's been focused in social justice and First Nations education, where nationally I was working as a senior policy advisor on the post-secondary file for First Nations across the country with the Assembly of First Nations. And that looked at jurisdiction, like local control of education. And it's funny because I feel like each experience kind of led to the next, I guess, decision I would make in my career. While I was at the AFN, you guys would have been little at the time, but I was doing a campaign for new schools on reserves, and we were lobbying a government at that time to make investments into First Nations communities that didn't have schools. And Tobic at the time wasn't a makeshift school. There was a generation of kids that went to school in the basement of a building, abandoned building, with no playground. They were using a parking lot for their recreational space, which was dangerous for them. Our school was in a state of disrepair. We'd been without a building here for quite a while, with our former school being deteriorated due to mold, which was insufficient funding for the band to keep it going. And so while I was working nationally and looking at how this was an issue in a lot of communities across the country, my heart was pulled back here because I thought, I'm spending this energy nationally looking everywhere in the country when my own community is facing this issue. And so we got the national chief at the time to come to Tobic to help on this initiative about raising attention and awareness to the Mossel School. And leadership at that time was successful in lobbying the government of the day to make investments for a new school here. And so it kind of diverted my interest back to New Brunswick while I was living in Ontario. So then I moved back to New Brunswick, and it was for a project in Aboriginal adult literacy, and it was a pilot initiative. And they wanted to try a program to see how many people felt low literacy was a barrier to their success in education. And so we had to create it from the ground up. And in doing a call out in the 15 communities, Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey, we saw for only 30 seats, we had an overwhelming amount of people apply. There was like 80 people that felt that their reading and writing levels is what held them back. And so that was sort of eye-opening for me as well. So we ran the program in over 2 years, and then I would say that it was life-changing for a lot of people because those that participated in there had gone on to be very successful in whatever career path they had. Some went on to post-secondary, graduated, became elected members of council, really found their space in their community. And so it showed me that the education system was failing our people, if that many people had felt that reading and writing is what held them back from success. And so you have to start early, because kindergarten to grade 3 is when you're learning to read. And then after that, you're reading to learn. So if you can't grasp key understandings of literacy and reading and writing, it was going to follow you all through your high school journey. And so they say the high dropout rates in education for First Nations kids, they kind of make their mind up in about grade 7. They fall behind in the middle school years when they're starting to read to learn. And then by the time they get to high school, when they're able to quit, at around age 15, you see a drop off in around ninth grade. And so after that, I ended up competing for a position in Neqotkuk for a director of education position. And in that role, at that time, we didn't have a lot of students in our school. One of the first things I did in the role was go door to door with a team of students that came on to help work with me. And we surveyed parents, and they had felt that literacy was the issue for them, that kids were finishing Mossos and not able to transition well into the provincial school. So we focused our education program at Mossos around literacy, and we sought partnership with a huge foundation that focused in literacy enhancement, and that's what Mossos has been geared around since 2015. And while there, I still took criticism. I was in the role for 7 years, but I took criticism particularly near the end about how we weren't putting enough focus into holistic way revitalization. And I've always noticed that our language teachers seem to run out of, I guess, gas and enthusiasm for the role because a lot rests on them. And so I felt as an administrator I needed to understand it a bit better to support language revitalization because I was a non-speaker. So then that's when I started to look into the PhD program. And I didn't know at the time that I would zero in just on holistic way language revitalization. I just wanted to dive into the research to see about ways to improve culturally based education for Neqotkuk. And while I was there and exposed to literature, I realized that a lot of the benefits as well as the challenges that our education and community is, and as well as our nation is facing, is fading away of daily use of our language. And like with every passing elder, I mean, it sounds cliche because you hear it all the time, but they are the encyclopedias of our language and worldview. But with every passing of an elder, you lose a lot of knowledge about our language. And so that became my key interest. And so for the last 5 years, I've tried to center my work around just holistic way language revitalization and just holistic way language planning. Grew up in Neqotkuk, and one of the courses in high school that I probably took most interest in was the Native Studies course, and it was just starting to be brought into the high schools at the time. And it was had to be funded by the band. We were paying to have it in the schools. And I ended up winning a bursary that year for that class. And it just really opened my eyes to understanding sort of the social ills of our community, what is at the root of it. And then when you start to understand the history, the policies, the legislation, the racism, everything that has happened in our history that has sort of contributed to the breakdown of our culture and the breakdown of our communities, it sort of lit a fire in me. So when I went off to university, I mean, it wasn't linear. Like I started out in political science, and I had a culture shock in the first year of like living in a city on my own, and I actually flunked out of my first year in university. And I then dropped down to college, and I took Aboriginal studies in college, where I got used to being in the city, made friends with other First Nations people. And then after graduating from that program, I realized I wanted to go back to university. So I went back and I took Canadian studies, and always just brought Indigenous perspective into what I was doing. Carleton at the time didn't have a Native Studies program, but they had courses under each curriculum. So then I switched from Canadian studies. After earning a degree in that, I switched to interdisciplinary studies and established my own program that would be like a Native Studies program, and just dug deeper from like a social work perspective. I took a law course, Indigenous peoples and the law. And then, just whatever I could, if it had like Indigenous content in it, I would try to broaden my understanding. and then I went to go work for a while in land claims negotiations and did that for, worked for Indian Affairs for about 10 years in that area, and still felt and recognized the imbalance of power, uh, particularly at those tables, and felt that I would rather be on the other side. And eventually went for my master's in conflict resolution because I felt like litigating and like using lawyers for everything just sometimes burdened processes. And I felt like our people deserve to realize justice and benefits faster. And I felt like negotiations could be something that would achieve that. And while I was very interested in that aspect on the rights-based stuff, I then got moved into education. And like I said, that's where I had spent my time after that. But it started out working in like through Native studies and looking at constitutional rights and focusing in on like our Section 35 rights and how they were being exercised in our community. So hunting, fishing, gathering, and how that has been restricted for us. I think it would probably be easier for youth today that we're moving to an urban center from our rural community because they have social media and like just technology is now in a way where you can see your family or your friends every single day through FaceTime and Zoom and whatnot. You can stay connected to your community while being away from your community. Through different social media sites, you can keep on top of what's happening in your community. Way back when I went to school, we were letter writing. So I did have friends from Tobic that would write me letters when I was away and send me funny pictures of stuff that happened like over the summer or whatever, or on the weekends. And that really helped. And I would say just being there and meeting all new people, coming from a small area and going into a city, everyone was so interesting to me that I was more interested in building a network than finishing school and my studies. So I think one of the toughest things that kids have to learn when they go away is just time management. They now have Indigenous advisors in a lot of schools. At that time, I overloaded my course load. I took 6 courses, which is what led to me failing. And I didn't realize that that was like way too much. I only needed to take 4. And so, but it was too late. And so that's just a lived lesson. So I think like seek advice when you're building your class schedule. Like if you're unfamiliar with how to balance that, maybe make a friend, another student who's in a upper year, or I mean, I guess now you could use the internet to Google, or probably TikTok offers those solutions, but you could also go to your Indigenous student advisor and find a way to help you build a schedule. So, and just stay connected to your community as much as you can. I think those things would help. Education is important to me because I recognize the power of education. It 100% changed my circumstances. You know, I grew up in poverty. I grew up with a single parent mother. I grew up on social assistance, and in an environment that wasn't very structured. And for me, the structure of school sort of provided me that stability that I needed, and I recognized that even as a youth. And I actually enjoyed being in school because it allowed me time to focus and sort of forget about anything that was happening around you, something that no one can ever take from you. You know, the slogans of knowledge is power type of thing. It's true. And as you know, that fire was lit in me about standing up for our people, standing up for Wolastoqey Way people. I knew that I had to understand our history, and I knew I had to understand our rights if I was ever going to advocate, you know, for a better future for our people. We are in a generation with the last fluent speakers. and I think we're fortunate that we are in this time, that we still have that exposure and we still have those resources. I know while I was going to school, like, we'll say, for the past 20 years, even 10 years ago or whatever, I wish I would have started my journey towards language learning when I was young, because I'd probably be fluent now. But I'd always felt that it was, you don't hear it, it's not used anywhere, there's no monetary value in learning it. You're not going to get hired even in our own community for speaking your language. It's just nice to have. And though, meanwhile, you'd hear those that were fluent in the language constantly laughing, joking with each other, like speaking with such joy and happiness when they conversated in the language. And I never really thought anything about that at the time growing up here. It was sort of taken for granted. And then now, after being exposed to literature, I realize that they are existing in this world with a completely different worldview than those that are unilingual English. They have a totally different way of seeing things, and understanding how to be at peace with what is around them. And when you work with an elder who breaks down words and translates for you, you start to see the worldview of our people, and you realize that we are really a culture that is peace oriented, and we have so much, if we were fluent in our language, so much, like we come, it sounds kind of corny, but like decision making, based on the heart, and have just more of a care for the world around them. And I feel, that the more disconnected we are from our language, the more disconnected we are from our ideology as a people. And so as you fight for treaties, or you fight for rights, and you fight to have more access for fishing and whatnot, I don't think that's where our identity lies. I think our identity lies in understanding your language and then pushing for that. And so the only book that had been published on our language was in 2012, and that was from a scholar from our community. And in that book, Defying Maliseet Language Death, if I can reference it, there's a line in there that he doesn't go deeply into attitudes, but the prevailing attitude at the time was that you didn't need to speak Maliseet to be Maliseet. And so that sort of stuck with me and kind of pushed my academic journey for my PhD. I wanted to respond to that statement. I wanted to see, I remember in 22 saying, okay, we're 10 years later. Is that still the way people perceive language, that you don't need to speak it to have that identity? And I feel as though there's more recognition and a desire to learn and to have language be a part of your life, and seeing that it's a core part of our identity. When I started back in 2018 in the PhD program to look at language revitalization, my supervisor at the time said, why don't you just spend the next 5 to 7 years just learning the language and documenting that journey? And it was difficult to find somebody that could mentor me for that length of time. And so I knew, as somebody who was interested more in educational leadership, that that's not the way I wanted to go. And so, I mean, in hindsight, it probably would have been interesting and I would have had more proficiency, but it's not it's not the route that I chose. However, by working in that space, it pushes you to be with elders, seeking concepts that are at risk of being lost perhaps, and like finding ways to translate a way of thinking into how would we say this in a holistic way. And so my knowledge has expanded as a result of it. Some of the words that I've used and incorporated into my writing are not everyday phrases. And so when I use those words or phrases with daily speakers, challenges them to pause and think about whether, like, they're like, I don't know what that means. What are you trying to say there? And then they think about it. Oh, okay, I know why they would say it that way. And then they start to, it starts to spur conversation. And so what I found is that even listening more intentionally to people when they speak, my proficiency has actually increased. I would never call myself a fluent speaker. Even to say that I understand more than I speak, I would be like beginner, total beginner. But it definitely forces you to embark on language learning. Another way that people can increase their own language learning is by bringing it into the family, bring it into your house. I truly believe that is the most effective domain, the most effective place to revitalize language. I hope that by the time I'm an elder, I'll be one of those living elders that are fluent. So I'd like to think that I'm young enough that I still have time. But yeah, that is my wish for myself personally.
Neqotkuk N'Tetli Mikwi Tahasoltipen. Too big we are remembering.